One. Welcome to another edition of F1 Brake Check. On today's edition, we are going to give an overview of the first street circuit of the year at the Jedda Coniche Grand Prix circuit. We'll have the triumphant return of our tech corner, and we'll have our reactions from the last race of the 2025 season's first triple header. So settle back, grab a drink, and prepare for the chaos we are about to unleash now on F1 Brake Check.
Welcome. You are listening to F1 Brake Check, the epic podcast for all things Formula One, where we discuss technology, history, news, and perspective. With your hosts, Scott Vick and Corey Broom.
All right, we're back with F1 Brake Check. My name is Scott Vick. I am one of your intrepid hosts, and with me, as always, is my brother in arms, my ride or die, my pundit for life, Mr. Corey Broom. Corey, how you doing this week, sir?
Good. It's yet another busy week, but it's good, man. How about you?
I'm doing well. It's same thing. It's already been, a very busy start to the week and everything, but I don't think I have it quite as bad as you, trying to get ready for your impending travels and everything. So are you ready to jump in?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. At this circuit, speed isn't just measured in miles per hour. It's measured in heartbeats. It's here the roar of 20 Formula One hybrid power units echoes across ancient sand dunes and ultra-modern skyscrapers alike. Welcome to the Jedda Coniche circuit, the fastest street circuit in the world and one of the most dangerous. Unveiled to the world in December of 2021, the high-speed marvel was born from Saudi Arabia's ambitious push to bring world-class motorsports to its shores. Designed by famed Herman Tilke, it stretches along the Red Sea, winding through the city streets in a layout that has instantly become both infamous and revered. It's a paradox of a track. On paper, it's a street circuit, but in reality, it behaves like a high-speed permanent road course. With 27 corners, the most of any circuit on the F1 calendar, and spread across 6.174 kilometers, it stands as one of the longest circuits on the Formula One calendar. But what truly makes it unique is the speed. Average speeds here exceed 250 kilometers per hour on narrow city streets flanked by unforgiving concrete barriers. Corner after corner come at the drivers like an unrelenting onslaught. And each series of corners tells a story all their own. Turns 1 and 2 are the opening act of the play. After a short run from the starting grid, the cars reach a sharp left-right flick that bunches the field together like a high-speed street fight. Chaos on the opening lap is almost a given, but even in the later stages of the race, it can be the scene of high drama. Turns 4 through 10 are what makes Jeddah terrifying. A relentless high-speed sequence with minimal runoff, no time to breathe, and absolutely zero margin for error. Drivers have likened it to threading a needle at full throttle. Turn 13 is a thing of beauty. A long 12-degree banked left-hander that slingshots drivers out toward the sea. It's the kind of corner where, if you're brave enough to keep your foot planted, you can make up critical time. But one misstep, and you'll find yourself in the barriers. Turns 18 to 21 create a set of high-speed S's. Not quite as difficult to tackle as Suzuka, but just as frightening. Turns 22 and 23 are the most daunting pair of corners on the track. It was here during 2022 qualifying that Mick Schumacher suffered a harrowing crash at nearly 270 kilometers per hour. The violent impact was recorded at 33 Gs, bringing a chilling reminder of the thin line between bravery and catastrophe in F1. Turns 25 through 27 is the high-speed kink that is home to the last DRS zone of the lap, leading into another slingshot turn onto the long front straightaway. Get it right, and it makes the leading car a sitting duck and primed for passing as the cars blast across the finish line. In 2021, under the glare of 600 brilliant floodlights, we witnessed one of the most intense, volatile, and downright controversial races of the modern era. A title fight for the ages, Hamilton versus Verstappen, contact, penalties, accusations of brake checking, 2 red flags, safety cars, and finally a victory for Lewis that kept his title hopes alive, calling it one of the hardest races of his career. Since then, Jeddah has developed a reputation for unpredictability, a race where anything can happen and often does. Safety cars are an all but certain guest to the party. Red flags also seem inevitable. And every year, drivers arrive knowing they'll be forced to dance on the absolute edge of control. Even in 2025, the story continues. Jeddah has become a new kind of legend, one forged not by decades of tradition, but by the sheer speed and spectacle. Jeddah isn't just a race, it's a survival test. It's a statement. It's a breathtaking, high speed gamble against fate. And it's one hell of a show.
I love Jeddah. It's always one of those tracks that is it always has some bit of drama. I think that I saw some statistic during the race that there has never been a race without a virtual safety car at the very minimum. But typically, it's a safety car. It's always
Mm-hmm.
almost always there, either one of the VSC or an SC all the way through. I think that's it's perfect for that track. It's exactly what that track is.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is another one of those tracks that on the sim and real life is even more frightening than it is on the
Yeah,
simulator. But on the simulator, it's just, it racing at this track on the simulator is just like racing it in real life, where you have to start out and like Martin Brundle was saying during the Sky Sports telecast, you really have to um build up your confidence. The drivers have to really build up their confidence, but it's also very much a rhythm track that once you get into a rhythm, it actually becomes, it flows so well
yeah,
most of the corners that I mean, it's like once you get into that flow, I mean, you can punch it and hang it out on the ragged edge, but it's like you do anything that gets you slightly out of that rhythm, whether it be a pit stop or or a safety
sure,
car or
yeah.
anything else like that, and it'll take you 3 4 laps to get back into that rhythm. Where the driver is starting to feel more comfortable. So I mean, it's an impressive circuit, and it does always, and even in a short time span of being a Formula One race, it's become quite synonymous with great racing. And even though it's a street circuit, it still provides good passing
Mhm.
opportunities. It's just all around. I love this track, and I
Yeah, yeah,
love
no
this
doubt about it.
race.
Yeah,
Yeah. All right, so moving on to the return of our tech corner. So in the past, we have talked about carbon fiber,
yep.
its history, how it came into the sport. We've talked about, different things, that center around the car's construction and everything's particularly like the flexi wing controversies that's popped up, especially late last year
Mhm.
and early, parts of this year and everything. And so I thought we would take a little deeper dive though into the construction of the cars out of carbon fiber and kind of its components, its history, as far as the construction goes and where we're at now. So carbon fiber construction. So there's a number of components that are required for making something out of carbon fiber. And for those of you who aren't familiar, carbon fiber is what almost the vast majority of a Formula One car is made out of because it's a very lightweight material. It's easily moldable into different shapes and that help contribute to the aerodynamics of the car, but it has the additional effect of being significantly stronger than aluminum or steel or anything else, but at a fraction of the weight.
Yeah.
So the parts of carbon fiber uh, basically consist of a sheet uh, of a woven carbon material that is woven into a crisscross pattern. That's part of what gives it its strength. And then there is a resin or like glue-like substance that's required in order to make that flexible fabric solid. But it also takes, and you can't just use just the glue though. It also requires using a vacuum or what they call an autoclave, where they will actually put the part into a plastic bag, suck all of the air out of that bag, and then put the part into a high temperature oven to cure that resin. And that's part of what gives carbon fiber its
Right.
rigidity.
So how are the components brought together once they're created and everything like that? How are the components actually brought together and put into an F1 car?
Okay, so first and foremost, you have the rolls of carbon fiber, and it's just like it sounds. It is just the teams buy large rolls of the carbon fiber material. Now, in years past, in the when carbon fiber first started being used in Formula One and in racing series and everything, the carbon fiber material would still come in rolls or in flat sheets, and then the teams would actually take and build molds, usually out of foam, and then they would take and they would lay in the carbon fiber itself, and then they would apply the resin to it. Where, but now in modern times, when they buy the rolls and sheets of carbon fiber, most of the time the material already comes pre-impregnated with the resin so that they don't have, because in the past when you were applying the resin by hand, there were still times where you might get like a bubble in it, or you might get one spot where you had more resin on a sheet of carbon fiber and maybe a little bit less, not as much in another place, because they were usually done with like precision paint brushes.
Mm-hmm.
And so the it sometimes led to, pieces that were, weak in particular spots, whereas now where they come pre-impregnated with the resin, they basically have a sticky back that the teams will take. And so let me back up real quick. So first of all, the carbon fiber comes on these large rolls, and what the teams will do is they will lay them out on a table, and then they will use a precision laser cutter to cut out the specific pieces that they need for making uh a particular piece for the car. So like a front wing or a rear wing, or a vortex generator that runs along the side pod, across the floor of the car, or just any piece like that. And what they will do is they'll take those cut pieces, and then they will take and lay them into a mold just like they've always have. Now, like I said, once upon a time, the molds were usually made out of foam, or something like that. But now with the event of 3D printing, they will actually 3D print the mold that the carbon fiber will then lay into. And so then they will lay in the carbon fiber and get it into positions and everything. So like, whether, be a curve, for a wing or anything like that, they will lay in each of the pieces in there all together. And then just like in the past, they will put it into a bag, suck all the air out of it, and then put it into the autoclave. This allows the teams to take, and because of 3D printing and everything, this allows the teams to take and be able to now create very, very complicated shapes and everything. And that's what's led to a lot of the innovations in the construction of the wings and various aerodynamic elements and everything, so that they're able to able to create much, much more complicated shapes and everything than they were in the past. And also they are able to do it with such precision because of the laser cutters and everything. But now, having said all of this, it's not a fast process. Even with the precision cutters where they're able to take and very precisely cut out the pieces of carbon fiber, even with the very precise molds and everything, it still takes hours and hours and hours to lay in these pieces into various components and everything. So something very complicated like a front wing or a rear wing or anything like that sometimes can take as much as a week to 2 weeks to be able to take and construct all the pieces and everything and put them all together. And then it spends hours in the autoclave curing before they pull that piece out, and it's actually a usable component for the car. So
I
that
was
kind of covers the
yeah.
construct how the construction has changed and things like that. With all this being said, if you want any more information on the history of carbon fiber and how it came to be part of such a integral part of the sport of Formula One, you can go back to our last season and check out episodes 208 and 209, where we talk a lot about the history, about we kind of touch on some of the higher points of the construction, before we did this deep dive today. One other thing I wanted to take and point out about the construction of the way that carbon fiber is done now is when carbon fiber was first introduced into Formula One, in order to achieve some of the rigidity and things like that that were required by, for the construction of the car by the teams, is the carbon. And if you go back to those previous episodes, we talk a lot about that, about how they would take and they would sandwich uh, aluminum honeycomb in between sheets of
Yeah.
fiber of the carbon fiber before they took and they did the curing process. Now they no longer really, in most cases, they don't really use the honeycomb anymore because they have learned how to be able to take and use different sheets thickness of the carbon fiber, and they're able to lay it in a specific pattern in order to take and either provide strength where it's needed or flexibility where it's needed. So in the case of a like the monocoque, the tub that the driver sits in, you might have as many as 8 to 10 sheets of carbon fiber that are laid in on top of each other. And if you're not watching us on the video, you can right now what I'm doing is I'm crossing my fingers at like a 45-degree angle, crisscrossing and this is kind of a symbol of what the fiber looks like, carbon fiber looks like when it's on the roll. And so what the teams will do though is they will take they can take and they can lay in the parts in different patterns. So you might have, a sheet that is set one way and the next sheet they might set in at a 90-degree angle so that the carbon fiber is running at a slightly different angle, and it's this overlap is what takes and helps create a lot of the rigidity that carbon fiber is so renowned for. So with that in mind, but then if you might have a piece that needs to be a little more flexible because it needs to be able to take and bend under load or anything like that, like say for example the wings
Yeah. Right.
or maybe the vortex generators or something like that. What they'll do is they'll lay on the pieces pretty much just one over the top of each other and may not work with the overlap or the crisscross as much, so that way they can take, and the teams have over years and years and years of building these carbon fiber parts for the cars, they've learned what's the best way to, if I need to make a part flex a certain amount, this is how many sheets I need to use, and this is how I need to lay them in, as opposed to the other, something that needs to be much much more rigid. So, and then one of the other things that last thing that I wanted to talk about the construction is, like I was saying, is the construction takes an enormous amount of time, especially when you get into very complex pieces. And they have people who work, these mechanics and engineers at the factories, who they have spent years and years and years perfecting their craft. And you will, if you can find different videos and stuff on YouTube and stuff about the way that watching carbon fiber be constructed and everything, that even after all these shapes are made and everything in these molds, and after they come out of the autoclave and they're fully cured, a lot of times these pieces will still need trimming, and because there might be a piece that they have to leave on, on the in the mold for the construction process and the curing process, but it doesn't need to be there once it's pulled out of the mold. And so it's a very laborious, where the teams will take, the mechanics will have to take and trim pieces of the carbon fiber off using things like X-Acto knives and things like that. So it's a very, very labor intensive process in order to take and create these beautiful complex shapes that we see in Formula One every single weekend.
I know you went over a little bit on the flexi part, but can you talk a little bit more about why was that a controversy, and why is that an issue, as far as if the wing flexes too much? Is that an advantage? Is that against regulations? Can you talk a little bit more around that?
Sure. So to answer your first part of your question of how important the flexibility of the wing is. Well, first of all, under aerodynamic load, you want things like the wings and stuff to flex a certain amount, because otherwise, if they're too rigid, once they're under that aerodynamic load, they'll literally just snap right off. And you don't, especially if you're going 300 kilometers per hour down a straightaway, you don't want the wings snapping off and and flying off the car. So they do have to have a certain amount of flexibility for these pieces. Now, where the regulations will state that, okay, the part can only flex a certain amount. So for example, say like you have a front wing and at static rest, it sits at a certain angle. And they will take and do a load test where, and I'm doing this with my hands if you're not watching the video version, where they will take a weight and they will press down on it on that particular piece. And depending upon the weight and how much weight it is and where it's located at, the part can only flex a set amount of distance before it would, and if it flexes too much, then it's deemed as illegal, because the more that a particular piece can flex may completely change the way that the aerodynamics are working, and the amount of downforce provided, or in some cases, how much drag it can take away. Because remember, the opposite of downforce is drag. And so last year, McLaren, and the first part of this year, McLaren got in. They were still within the letter of the law, but they actually changed the FIA changed the regulations, because the McLaren rear wing was still within the rules, but it was able to flex enough that it acted almost like like the DRS, because the wing would actually flex upward just ever so slightly. So whenever it was not in use for DRS, that wing was still opening a little enough on a straightaway that it was actually giving them a slight speed advantage. So this is where, so that's one case. And I believe it was not last year, but the year before that, when when Red Bull was doing something very similar with their front wings, where the front wing was flexing so much under on the straightaways that it was significantly reducing the drag going down the front straightaway. And that's how come I keep saying McLaren. That's how come the Red Bulls were able to have such a advantage for their straight line speed, was because that wing was flexing enough to take a considerable amount of the drag off that front wing when they were going in a straight line. But then as soon as they were under braking, that wing would flex back up into its normal position, providing the additional downforce needed in order to get the car to rotate. So that's where the flexible wing controversy has come about. And there's been other bits and parts of the cars that have also fallen underneath this. And so that's the reason why the FIA now has the regulations that say, the parts can only bend so much before they're considered illegal. And they've tightened it up even more so to say, okay, the wings can, it's like, I don't have the figures in front of me, but it's, the FIA has said you could only, it could only deflect by, 5 millimeters. And now they've tightened it up to say it's only like 2 millimeters. Again, I don't know if those are the exact numbers. I don't have them in front of me at the moment, but it's something along those lines. So they have really tightened up the amount of flex that's available in the wings. But you can definitely see that, like, especially like on a lot of the in-car cameras from Jeddah, you could see as the car was going down the straightaway or going through a corner, you could see the front wings as they were flexing across the points where they're designed to flex at.
Right.
All right, so that's our tech corner for this week. So I hope it was interesting. I hope we didn't bore you to death. If you have comments, please leave them down below. We would love to hear what you have to say. What did we get right? What did you like? What did you not like? Are we idiots? Let us know. We love to hear from you. Right. So let's take and jump into our news and reactions for this week. So first off, we have to take and commend McLaren for Oscar Piastri's absolutely stunning victory. He looked like absolutely like the class of the field. And we'll get a little more into Oscar here in a minute. But because of other things that happened this weekend, my first question is Lando cracking under the pressure. We saw him exit Q3 almost immediately when he on his or not immediately. We saw him exit, during his final run when he got a little squirrely coming down, into I believe it was into 22 and smacked the wall and put himself out of Q3. So it relegated him to P10
Yeah.
on the starting grid. And now he did recover quite well and went from 10th all the way up to 4th, just missed out on the podium. But now it begs the question after last week's, qualifying where he wound up 6th, and then this week where he takes and he crashes out in Q3. Is Lando cracking under the pressure? Your thoughts?
I don't want to be harsh here, but I don't think he's crashing under pressure. The thing about it is he's not he's a great driver, don't get me wrong, but he's not a Piastri, he's not a Verstappen, he's not a Hamilton, blah blah blah. He's not a Antonelli. He's what we're seeing from Lando is, I believe, the best that Lando has to offer. That is where he will be. He will be, more than likely, he will be the number 2 spot very shortly at McLaren. You can't have a powerhouse like Piastri and hold him back because you're honor bound to Lando. They're going to have to make that call at some point because Piastri is leading him now, but unless there's team orders, he's going to keep that lead. And it's just going to keep growing because that's the type of driver Piastri is. Now, could he get there? Could he be the number 1 and actually retain that number 1 spot? Possibly, but there would be a lot of changes in not only in his driving style, but also in his personality as well. And I don't know if he's willing to do that. What are your thoughts?
Okay, so you've kind of already answered my next question. So I wanted to ask you one more question, and then I'll give you my thoughts. So you've already kind of answered it. So do you think that Oscar is the heir apparent at McLaren now?
Yeah, I have no doubt about it. In fact, I think I said in the very beginning of the season that I thought that he was going to win the championship. He, being Oscar Piastri, is going to win the championship this year. I don't see Lando doing that. I don't think that he's going to be able to carry it. Again, unless something happens and something really snaps in him. But history shows us that that's not the kind of driver he's going to be. So I see Piastri. I mean, he went wheel to wheel with Max Verstappen, which even Hamilton doesn't do with all of his experience. So that shows you he has what it takes to be that number 1 spot.
All right, fair enough. Myself, I'm still going to, because having watched Lando, having watched him basically kind of, for lack of a better term, kind of grown up over before our eyes in the last couple of years, and having gone from, a guy who was really, really quick, but had a car that wasn't always the best, to this year where, by all accounts, the McLaren is undoubtedly the best car on the grid right now. But, I don't think so what I'm going to say is I don't think he's cracking underneath the pressure. I think that he's just kind of had a run of bad luck. I think he was pushing just a little too hard, trying to make hay, if you will, at this last weekend. So no, I don't think that, he's cracking under the pressure.
Yeah.
Do I think that Oscar is the heir apparent at McLaren? I think maybe I don't want to anoint him as the number 1 just yet. I still think that, as the season progresses, it's still going to be a 2-way fight between the 2 drivers. Mm-hmm. Now, having said that, though, if one driver gets a lead of, and I'm sure that McLaren has a number already in mind. I'm sure that Zach and Andre already have a number in their head that if the gap is X between the 2 drivers, then the lead driver is going to become more or less the de facto number one for at least for the remainder of the season, and all of the effort is going to go into supporting him. But whether or not it's Lando or Oscar, I think that they don't care. I think that but I think it'll be more. This is going to be more of a conversation of who the heir apparent is as we
Yeah.
get closer to the summer break. I think is really kind of where we're at.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, so moving on to Red Bull. So Red Bull had some struggles this weekend. Max's blinding qualifying lap and aside. So first of all, let's take and talk about Max's qualifying lap in Q3. So he pulled out an absolutely
Mhm.
blinding fast lap to take the pole position, but I forgot what the difference was, but I think it was something like 7 thousandths of a second. I
Something
mean,
like
it
that.
was
Yeah.
just ridiculously thin margin that, and it all came down to literally just to the brilliance of
Yeah.
Max Verstappen is what got him that pole
No
out. So
doubt.
your thoughts?
Yeah, no doubt about it. We're not seeing the brilliance of Red Bull. We are seeing the brilliance of Max Verstappen. Make no doubt about it. Again, we're at a track where the driver makes the track. There's certain circumstances where that's not true, where Piastri and Norris could take him just purely because of how much better the car is front line speed. But make no mistake, the reason why he was on pole was because of Max Verstappen. It was not because of how good the Red Bull is. And I still maintain that. There's just
Yes.
the Red Bull just isn't there still.
No, I absolutely agree. In looking at the cars this year and everything, I would say that Red Bull is probably maybe third, maybe fourth best car on the grid
Yeah.
right now. So, you're right. It was absolutely the brilliance of Max
Yep.
Verstappen was the only thing that got him that pole.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So at the start, Oscar and Max went wheel to wheel into the first corner. Max went off track and then took and tried to say, no, he forced me off the road and everything, which, might have been true, but because of extenuating circumstances, it was as much his fault as anything. So Max was given a 5 second penalty for leaving the track and gaining an advantage in the wording of the
Mhm.
stewards. Do you think that penalty was too harsh? Do you think he should have been given a penalty at all? Or do you think it was not harsh enough? Your thoughts?
Yeah. It's a hard one because uh, technically it was Piastri's corner, but Max was still leading in that corner. So I have a hard time believing, that a 5 second penalty I think is a bit too harsh. But then again, I mean, that's the lowest amount that they can give him, right? So they had to give him something. He really should have given that place back initially, and instead he bolstered forward. Um, that's what I think should have happened. So, you know, the FIA I think was actually correct in this decision. Again, I have probably should go buy a lottery ticket or something. I've agreed with the FIA's decision on 2 podcasts now, so I don't know what that means, but maybe the end of days is happening soon. But I do agree with it. You know I do feel it's a bit harsh, but again, what was the alternative? You don't really have one. So if Max didn't give the spot back, which he didn't, he should have, but he didn't, the FIA has no other recourse but say, hey, you have a 5 second penalty. So that's my thoughts on it. What about you?
Yeah. No. I don't think the penalty was too harsh. I think
Yeah.
it was perfectly warranted because you're right. When Max went off the track, he should have given the place to
Yep.
Piastri
Yep.
because the way that the letter of the law is if the passing driver's front wheels are even or ahead of the driver being passed, if it's in front or if it's alongside or in front of his mirrors, then
Yeah.
the passing driver is deemed to have the corner. And Piastri had the corner by the letter of the law.
Yep. Yep.
Max took and tried to outbrake him which, most drivers, any driver worth his salt, that's going to be his their first reaction is to take and try to outbrake the other driver. But Piastri judged the braking point perfectly.
Yeah,
He
no
could
doubt.
not have done it any better.
Yeah,
And because of that, even though Max took and tried to outbrake him, there was no way he was going to make that corner. So he had to go off the track. At that point, Red Bull should have said, give him the
yeah,
place.
he
Let him
should.
have it.
Yeah,
Because he didn't, and he whined, and I will stick by that word, whined. He whined about how Piastri pushed him off the track. No, Max, you went off the track because you couldn't control the car.
yeah,
Because you took and tried to outbrake him, even though you knew he had the corner.
right.
So that's why he didn't give the place back. And because of that, that's why he received the 5-second penalty,
Yep.
which I thought was, in this case, was totally warranted. And I will fight. And I'm like you, it's for the second week in a row, I've agreed with the FIA and the
I
stewards,
know it's
but
scary, man.
but yes, it's scary. But yes, but no, I totally think it was warranted. Max was, in the wrong, and then McLaren took and pulled out an absolutely brilliant pit stop for Piastri, got him out ahead of Max, and he never looked back. And the gap, despite all of Max's efforts, especially in the closing parts of the race, Piastri had him handled the entire way. I really think that had he wanted to push it a little harder, I really think that Piastri probably could have opened up that gap even more
Agreed.
because Max wasn't making any time on him. The
Yeah,
only time that Max ever was able to close up that gap was when Piastri caught some of the back markers and had to
yeah,
get around them. The gap kind of came down, but then as soon as Piastri got around him and then Max had to deal with him, that gap widened right back
Yep.
up to where it was at the entire second half of the race,
Oh,
at
yeah.
5 or 6 seconds, gap. So beautiful job by Piastri to take and the McLaren team to take and get them out when Max had to make his stop and had to sit there for that additional 5 seconds. So I brilliant all the way around for McLaren.
Yeah, yeah, totally agree.
So jumping over to the other, I'm sorry. So jumping over to the other Red Bull driver, we had another, up until the race, Yuki was having a great weekend.
Mm-hmm.
He improved his grid position, his qualifying position. He looked really strong all weekend long. I really think that he's really getting to grips with the car and the way that it's set up. And I just thought Yuki he's looking more and more confident all the time. What say you?
Oh, I agree. I think that, I think you said last podcast, if he would have had more time in the car, what he would be like today.
Mm-hmm.
It's finally they have a driver that's at least close to Max. So
Yes,
yeah, I
but
mean, Yuki started 6, Max was on pole, but it's been a long time since they've had somebody that was even that close to Max in that car. So it's going to be exciting to see Yuki, see what he can do in this car in the next
Mm-hmm.
3-4 races. Or we were talking about summer break, see what he can do then.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, unfortunately, Yuki's weekend came to a very abrupt end in the second, before he even got to turn 2, when he and Gasly, former teammates, came together and they both wound up in the barrier. Now, Yuki was able to limp back around to the pits, but as soon as he got there, they figured out that the damage was terminal and they killed the power unit and his day was done. But so first of all, your thoughts on the incident between Gasly and Yuki?
I think it's just one of those racing incidents, man. I don't think it was,
Agreed.
it certainly wasn't malicious. And I just think it was one of those things that, it's racing.
Yeah. No, Martin Brundle said the same thing on the Sky Sports telecast. It was, and I agree with him, and obviously you agree with him as well. It was a first lap racing incident. He was just wrong place, wrong time for both drivers. They touch wheels, and that's the one bad thing about open wheel race cars like Formula One and IndyCar and things like that. If a tire touches a side pod, most of the time you can escape from it. But when tire touches tire, that
Yeah.
tire,
Yeah.
that grip
Yeah.
touches, and it's
Oh
game
no.
over. So
Yeah.
unfortunately.
Yeah.
So, it's just a bad, time for Yuki. But other than that, I thought that he looked absolutely fantastic this weekend. And I'm just going to say, Yuki, keep doing what you're doing.
Yeah. 100%.
Okay. So next up, let's talk about Ferrari's up and down weekend. So we had Charles's triumph in the fact that he had an absolutely stellar qualifying. He ran a really great race. Ferrari, nailed the strategy, and or not nailed it, but they didn't screw anything up with the strategy and everything, and
Which
got
is nailing
Charles
it for
a
them.
yeah, exactly. But it took so Charles took and had an absolutely stunning race and wound up on the third step of the podium. And then we had the opposite in Lewis was really struggling with the car again this weekend. So your thoughts?
Yeah, I was talking to a friend of mine about Lewis today, and one of the things that we were both agreeing on was this: Lewis should stop nagging on the things that are not working and focus more on his driving. It seems like to me that he is so focused on what's not working, that he's not getting grip here, he's not doing that there, that it's adversely affecting his driving abilities. Now, when he was talking to his race engineer, he was asking where he was slow. And his race engineer is coming back, well, you're 7/10 here, you're 6/10 here. And, you know, his comment back was like, oh, yeah, when you're that far off the mark, it's just,
Mm-hmm.
and if you're driving truly your best, I mean, there's no coming back from that. There's no way you're going to get anywhere fast. So, if I were his coach or his race engineer, I would have a very serious heart to heart and just say, look, man, the car is a car. We can improve it here, and here, but the rest you need to do. You need to come up and not be so negative. Concentrate on things that make you great. Stop looking at the things that are detracting you, because it's not doing you any favors at this point. What about you? What do you think?
I agree in the fact that he is still coming he's coming to grips with the Ferrari. I mean, you can't we've talked about it ad nauseum, so I'm not going to really belabor the point, but you can't spend over a decade with the same team and then jump to another car and with almost no testing, no time, seat time in the car, and expect to be able to, go out and just light the world on fire. It's not like the 90s and early 2000s where you had hundreds of hours in the car in preseason testing. So I'm not going to belabor that anymore. But, I do think that, we are starting to see some flashes of brilliance. So, like the fight between Lando and
Mm-hmm.
Lewis, mid race, where Land on back to back laps, he was able to slow up just enough going into the last corner that
Yeah.
it forced Lando to actually overtake him. But then as soon as they got around the corner, it gave Lewis
Yep.
DRS,
Yep.
and he was able to pass him going into turn one on two consecutive laps. And it was only through Lando's intelligence and driving ability that on the third time around, he was able to slow up just enough to not pass Lewis. But the fact that Lewis was able to do it to him two
Yeah.
laps in a row just goes to show, just how wily
Yeah.
he still is. And the fact that he was able to, come to grips enough. He's coming to grips enough with the car that he knew that he could take, and
Right.
he could do this, that if Lando was faster than him, he could still be smart enough to be able to take and outfox him, which he did on so all in all, I thought he had not a great weekend but a solid weekend.
Yeah. 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 And again, if he can get and extract a little bit more out of that car, I think he's going to be a very serious contender in the drivers' championship.
Yeah, I don't know necessarily that, I do think that
He's
he's
not
going to
going to win
place,
it, but
he's
he'll
not going
be
to
up
win it,
there.
but I do think he,
Yeah,
he will have a very solid, year. And
yeah, that's what I mean.
I
Yeah,
definitely
exactly.
think top five is definitely
Yeah,
in the cards for him.
I certainly believe that as well.
Yeah. So, all right. So let's move on to the midfield real quick. So Williams had another very, very impressive weekend, and they really are starting to look, as we talked about during, after the first couple races, that we were trying to, say who, Williams was the class in the midfield. And this weekend, they really looked that way. So your thoughts on Williams first?
Yeah, Williams continues to impress. I'm really, really happy with the car so far. It's looking really, really good. Both drivers, Sainz is continuing to improve. I think that he's feeling more and more comfortable in that car, and their strategies are starting to line up. So I think that Williams is starting to shape up. I'm really happy to see that their placement and how the car is actually driving right now.
Yeah, absolutely. So they both had solid but not, great qualifying in the fact that, Sainz qualified sixth. So he did have a really good qualifying run, and Albon, qualified 11th, but to end up finishing up, eighth and ninth, get some much needed points for the team and everything. So yeah, it was a really good weekend for Williams, and they are looking very, very strong with each consecutive weekend. And like you said, Sainz is starting to look more and more comfortable in the car all the time. And in fact, this was the first weekend in which Sainz has actually out qualified Albon.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
it was really, quite impressive.
Yeah. Yeah, again, I
So,
love to see that because I think uh signs I'm really happy to see that because I'm a huge fan of his, and I'm glad to see
mhm.
that he's starting to come up on Williams and understand how to drive that car a little bit better.
Yeah, absolutely. And then on the flip side of the other team that we thought was at the top of the midfield, Haas came in really hoping to have, fourth weekend in a row of scoring points and everything else. And it was not as good of a weekend for them with Ollie, Bierman coming in. Let's see, he finished what, 13th, so, a couple places outside of the points, and Ocon, finished up, in 14th place. So not a great weekend
Yeah.
for Haas. So, but the thing is though, is it's like I think that Haas, will definitely be able to regroup and look a lot better by the time we get to Miami.
Yeah, one thing that I wanted to ask you about is what do you think about Behrman so far? Because he started off really, really hot, and now it seems like he's kind of not doing so well. What are your thoughts around that?
I To be honest with you, I think a little bit of it is the car. I think a little bit of it is just being a rookie and having, a little bit of a slump. But with that in mind, though, even though he's, a quote unquote, even though he's a rookie, I mean, he's still consistently out racing and out qualifying his much more experienced
Yeah,
teammate in Ocon. So I think it's, a little bit of it, I think it's just part of, the growing pains of being a rookie at, because unlike Antonelli, who is an extremely talented driver, but he's also at a top tier team who
mm,
has a lot of experience with nurturing and, you know, uh, what's the word I'm looking for? Of nurturing, and developing talent. And even though Bierman's still part of the Ferrari driver academy, he's not going to get kind of the same support like he would if he were actually at the
yeah,
Ferrari
yep, yep.
team. So I think that a little bit of it is just being a rookie and not quite having as much support as he would if he were at a team that was higher up in the
Yeah, of
field.
course. Right.
But the fact that he's still out dueling Ocon, and in Formula One, your teammate is always going to be your yardstick.
Yeah.
Regardless of, how good or how bad the car is, how well do you qualify and how well do you race against your teammate? And the fact that Ocon, who has considerably more, number more years, previous Grand Prix winner, and he is out driving Ocon on a regular basis, tells me what I need to know, that it's not necessarily that I mean he's still, a very talented driver in a somewhat mediocre car,
Yeah.
and this is kind of, to be expected from Haas. Even though despite 3 weekends of scoring points, you knew that
Hmm.
they were going to have an off weekend, and I
Sure.
think that was this one. And I think that once we get to Miami, I think we'll see a different result out of Bierman. Lance Stroll took and got another Formula One record this weekend, in the fact that he now holds the record for the most Q1 exits in the history of the sport. And it makes me kind of wonder, are we starting to see the writing on the wall? Are we finally starting to see the cracks at Aston Martin that is going to lead to his quote unquote, and I'm doing the air quotes here, retirement from Formula One at the end of the season? Do you think that the possibility of it happening is getting stronger, or, staying about the same?
Again, it all goes back to Lawrence Stroll, his dad, the owner of Aston Martin. Does he want a championship outfit, or does he want basically a playground for his son? So if Lance Stroll is in the seat next year, then it's a playground for his son.
Mm-hmm.
If not, then Aston Martin will be a force to be reckoned with, because they have a ton of people. They have an army, as well as the best performance engineer that you could ask for in Adrian Newey. So they have everybody all aligned. Take Lance out, put somebody else in, Verstappen, and you'll have a phenomenal team.
Yes, I completely agree that you're right. In all of the pieces are there
Yeah,
for 2026 to be a phenomenal year for
minus
Aston
one
Martin.
seat.
Minus, yeah, is if providing they have two top class,
Yep.
world class drivers in the seat. If they, whether it be Alonso or another driver,
Yeah.
and and not Stroll, in the other seat, depending upon who they have as
Yeah.
the drivers next year. But they have all the other pieces to
Yep.
be a world class operation. They have they have the infrastructure, they have the
Yeah.
personnel, they have the minds, to take and run from a management standpoint. They just need to, now all they need to do is they have a plan. They just need to execute. And if they do that, they are going to be a force, like you said, a force to be reckoned with.
Yep.
But that's not going to include Lance Stroll. As
No,
much as I like the guy, as much as I've made apologies for him, but now at this point, I think it's time for him to move on.
I agree. Just
Especially when he, had a terrible qualifying, exits on Q1. He was basically running at the back of the pack the entire race. And then you have your teammate who, albeit is he seems to be the ageless wonder in Fernando Alonso, who, he doesn't celebrate, non-points paying finishes, but you have to feel, depending, because of where they started out at this season, for Alonso to come home in 11th place it's a pretty big deal. So your thoughts on Alonso's 11th place?
uh, you know, given the car, I think that that's a really healthy place where he got to. So 11th place, I think, obviously hoping for points here soon, but knowing where the car is, I think that's almost like number one.
Almost. It's almost as good as a win.
Yeah.
All right. So real quick, let's take and talk rumors. So apparently, have you seen the latest rumor about Checo?
Yes. Yeah, I think, we'll see.
Yeah.
It'll be interesting.
Yeah. All right. So for those of you who are not familiar with what Corey and I are talking about, Apparently, the rumor has it that Checo has signed his name on the dotted line to a very lucrative contract, and he is the first driver to be signed as a driver for Cadillac when they join the grid next year. So, your thoughts on Checo becoming the first Cadillac driver? Do you think it's true? And if so, do you think do you believe the press in the fact that it's a good step for Checo? Your thoughts?
I think it's definitely a great step for Checo. It'll put him back on the grid. And the other thing that it'll give him is, that kind of I told you so, because he is a great driver, just didn't look like it because the Red Bull car just didn't suit his driving style in the least. So he was booted out pretty quick. But, again, we look at that one season, 2022, where Max was so dominant. Well, Checo was too in the very beginning, and then he slid back. Well, the only reason why you slide back like that is either you lost confidence completely, or there's something very bad wrong with the setup of that car. And I'm very much believing that it was the car and not the driver. So we'll see when he gets into that Cadillac, if he gets into the Cadillac, that his ability is still there.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with you that his ability was there. I absolutely agree with you that the his slide backwards on the grid and all of his struggles was a combination of the car was bad, so it shook his confidence. The more his confidence got shaken, the worse the car got. The worse the car got, the more, it was the vicious cycle of the car was bad. He couldn't get it set up, so it shook his confidence. So now the car was even worse, and so on and so forth. So I think that if the rumors are to be believed, and I do believe them because I know that the Cadillac he was very high on Cadillac's list even before he was bounced from Red Bull. So and the other thing too that it's going to is having been at a top tier outfit like Red Bull, he is going to be able to take and help the Cadillac engineers and mechanics and everything develop that car much, much better than I think, because, the only other driver that I could think, that's available that would have the kind of experience to take and help develop a car would be Bottas.
Yeah.
And, if rumors are to believe, Bottas is definitely in the running. Cadillac, although they said that they're looking at, American drivers to take and put into one of the seats. They've said that it doesn't necessarily have to be an American. So the possibility of having a Bottas in that second seat, very good. Although, I think a lot of it we'll see more of it as we get closer to the summer break. How well does Herta do in IndyCar? Right now, he's been making, some mistakes and things like that, and he hasn't looked great. I mean, his qualifying pace has been phenomenal. I mean, he qualified second at Long Beach last weekend. He had it not been for some really disastrous pit stop work from the Andretti team, he would have, been definitely, on the podium, if not outright won at St. Pete at the season opener. So, I mean, he's looked good. He's looked quick, but he's made a lot of mistakes. The team's made a lot of mistakes. So I think if they can get that corrected, maybe Cadillac will start looking at him again. But if he doesn't right the ship over there in IndyCar, Bottas could be in with a shout.
Yeah. You know how excited I'd be if that happens.
Yes, I absolutely do know.
As if Vettel announced that he was coming back. Almost.
Yeah. Which some of the stuff that we saw this weekend, especially around the F1 Academy, with Vettel being there and everything was really fun, but we'll hold off and we'll talk about that next week.
Awesome.
During our news section.
Awesome. Sounds good.
All right, then. So I think we're just about out of time. So shall I read us out?
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Okay, so the sun has set over the desert in an array of colors, and the hundreds of LED lamps have been extinguished. Join Corey and I next week when we will have an all-new history lesson. We'll play Stump the Pundit, and we'll dissect the latest news and rumors leading up to the next race in Miami. So until next time, he's Corey, I'm Scott, We're the pundits of F1 Brake Check. Let's go!
Thank you for listening to F1 Brake Check. If you have enjoyed what you heard, don't miss a single episode by hitting that subscribe button in your favorite podcatcher, or you can watch the video version on YouTube. Help us grow by sharing us with your friends and fellow F1 fans. You can contact us on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, TikTok and X at F1 Brake Check. Our website is f1brakecheck.com, where you will find links to all our content. We value your passion and your feedback, so please take a moment to review our podcast. Your reviews help us grow and improve, and it means the world to us. Share your thoughts, rate us, and let us know how we can make the show experience even better. F1 Brake Check is a production of Brake Check Media. For your hosts Scott Vick and Corey Broom, until next time, keep yourself inside track limits, and try not to pitch it in the kitty litter.